You know, there are very few movies that would fit my criteria as perfect. I think of movies like Jaws, Speed Racer, Tremors, and Lord of the Rings. They all fit that perfectly. With animation, though, you have just as many perfect movies, though. I always think about movies like The Iron Giant, Fantastic Mr. Fox, The Hobbit, and The Wind Rises. But when it comes to the animated sphere, I don't think any other movie has touched DreamWorks' How to Train Your Dragon. Now, How to Train Your Dragon, in my opinion, is DreamWorks' magnum opus, right after the Kung Fu Panda series. But with dragons, you have this incredible story that is told throughout the years of the main character, Hiccup. So in a sense, if you watched this when you were a kid, you basically grew up right alongside the character. It's weird to say this, but from the first movie when I was close to the same age as Hiccup to now, it's oddly surreal. With plans of the new live-action movie coming out next year, I wanted to revisit the series. So with that being said, let's cover every single movie along with the specials and the TV series. So let's get started with one of the greatest animated movies of all time. So, are we all in agreement that this movie is timeless? It's such a simple story that is well told, where our main character Hiccup is the chief's son, at a time where dragons and Vikings are bitter enemies. But, before we go into anything, I need to talk about the music. This is one of my favorite soundtracks, and it goes so deep that I can quote entire scenes by just the music alone. Okay, so I have the soundtrack up here for the one scene that I can quote. I don't know how to prove that I am not like cheating. Okay, I have a sock which I will use as a blindfold. Alright, there's like a big wide shot. Okay there, bud. We're gonna take this nice and slow. And he like looks down. Position 3. No, 4. And I think that the way this movie starts is great. The animation, the shadows, and the lighting in the beginning are fantastic, where the entire world is enveloped in darkness until all of a sudden there's these bright, shining blazes of fire with the dragons. The character introduction is quick and to the point as well. Characters and story here is at the front and center. You learn all about Hiccup, his likes, his dislikes, the way that he's treated on the island. Hiccup is a relatable protagonist as well, and it's done super fast. You learn that he's basically the outcast of the island. Even his own father doesn't like him that much.
Every time you step outside, disaster falls.
And I think that the heart of this movie is Hiccup's relationship with his father as well as Toothless. I like that it's a slow understanding of the dragons through him, where at first we learn that dragons are these ruthless creatures that will kill anything in sight, and as well as the Vikings. But we learn slowly that the Vikings know just as much about dragons as we, the audience, does. And I like that Hiccup here is a smart protagonist. He isn't a buff Viking, so he has to rely more on his inventions that he makes to be on the same level as them.
Okay, fine, but this will throw it for me.
And that all comes together when he invents the fake tail for Toothless, and slowly the two start to be in sync more with their flying sequences. These were so amazing to see in the theaters. This movie is almost 13 years old, and the colors and the shadows of when the romantic flight occurs still gives me chills, and the music as well. The editing of them are super exciting as well when he flies, especially with the end fight. The dragons are introduced very quickly too, and you understand what each one of them do. They're unique enough, but they're also not confusing.
Welcome to Dragon Training.
I also love these POV shots that happen every so often to really show the scale of the dragons as well. And the rules of the dragons are clearly set. Later on when Hiccup is training, Gobber teaches the kids how many shots the dragon has,
If you get blasted, you're dead.
how Vikings interact with the dragons,
Extremely dangerous, kill on sight.
how they feel about the dragons.
Go for the kill.
The dragon that Hiccup befriends, Toothless, is extremely likable right away. And how did they do this? Toothless is basically a cat, and this is to the benefit of the character. We're able to understand the rules of the dragon fast, as well as its cuteness. There's so many scenes in this movie and later on where Toothless is just straight up a cat, to even that thing that cats do when they bat you in the face. I've just got to say that this is just a perfect movie and a brilliant way to set up a world. Everything here is clearly established. So with that being said, let's build up the world even more. Legend of the Bone Napper Dragon. This was like a bonus feature for the DVD release. I remember I got this like combo pack.
The Hammerhead Yak riding the Hammerhead Wheel!
Deploy the yak.
The animation here, it's good. It's exactly like in the movie. You learn a lot about Gobber's backstory and the humor is actually really funny.
Gobber, take off your pants! Huh?
This is sort of like a pilot episode to the Dragon series later on. You see a lot of the dynamics that will become the sea in that series later on.
Oh, his tailbone is hurting my tailbone.
Overall, pretty good. The Book of Dragons. You're a new dragon trainer, and you're being taught about the book that Hiccup read in the first movie. It's okay. The animation is pretty cheap, and it reuses a lot of animation for the 3D elements. This is mostly those wanting to know how the franchise classifies the dragons. I would say that this is the only one that I would personally skip, or the one that I just view as not necessary to watch. The only thing that really adds to it is that you learn that Hiccup is slowly going to be adding to the book, like later on in the series. Gift of the Night Fury. This was basically like a Star Wars holiday special. It's the annual holiday celebrating dragons, but they're all of a sudden missing. You start to see that Hiccup and Toothless are starting to do tricks and get better as a rider. And in this, it's something that is very important actually. Hiccup creates a tail that can be used to fly alone, which will later get mentioned in the third movie.
You tried this once before. He didn't want it.
And there's actually some really great stuff here with Stoic.
I know what it's like to miss someone you love this time of year.
I think the thing that's kind of cool is just more the world building that you get to see. You get to see more of the traditions that Vikings use, along with more dragon information, sort of like how the eggs explode. The animation here, it's quite good, just like the Legend of the Bone Napper Dragon. It's a little downgraded, but it's still a good 15-minute special. Nothing harmful. Riders of Berk. This premiered on Cartoon Network, and I never actually got to see this or the Defenders of Berk on TV because I never had television growing up, so I'd always have to rent these from the library whenever they came out on the DVD. I love that it's still 3D animation. I can't stand it when a movie will come out and they'll do some sort of sequel series or prequel series and it will completely change the look of it. Sometimes it can be to its benefit, but other times it just feels more like a downgrade. And here, it's still 3D animation, and while it is a downgrade, it's not necessarily a massive one. It's still pretty good for a kids show. It's pretty incredible that most of the voice cast is here for the entirety of the Dragons television show run. A few voices are replaced, but most of the people did return. And I would say here the first season is pretty good. They address things like how not every Viking is willing to change with the rest of them, and that it's not a direct change right away where all things are great right away. The series addresses a slow change of how the dragons and the Vikings try to coincide with one another. In this season, there is a lot of conflicts and plot that evolve around people's lives changing now that the dragons are allies. There's always this lone Viking named Mildew who's trying to cause trouble. Later on, there's a main villain that's introduced, Alvin the Treacherous, which Mark Hamill voiced, and he does amazing.
Hiccup, hiccup, hiccup. Why do you have to make things so difficult?
But some of the episodes are more smaller, like how they're trying to find a place for Gobber now that Berk no longer has a need for dragon-killing weapons. How the farm animals of Berk get used to the dragons being around. Stoic the Vast getting his own dragon, Thornado. The dragons being sick and them trying to help him. Overall, this was a pretty good first season for a children's show. Defenders of Berk. This is season 2 of the Dragons series. Every single one has a different name. For instance, season 1 is called Riders of Berk. Season 2 is Defenders of Berk, and then the rest of the series is just called Race to the Edge. For Defenders of Berk, I think that this is pretty good. It's more so talking about the changes that a lot of the characters are going through now. For instance, Astrid and Hiccup's relationship are improving even more, as well as the riders in total. There's not a lot that I can complain about here. I mean, the animation is still the same. A lot of the villains are interesting. If you're wanting more of just Riders of Berk, here you go. Race to the Edge. Okay, so this is a prequel to How to Train Your Dragon 2. In the canon, it takes place after Defenders of Berk, but the way it was released was after How to Train Your Dragon 2. And it's pretty cool. When you watch How to Train Your Dragon 2, There's a lot of things that just kind of happen, and it makes sense that he would have a glider or, different sort of inventions, but if you want to see how he came about those inventions, this is the series, and it went on forever. From 2015 till 2018, this debuted on Netflix, and I remember every single time it would appear, I would always get excited. As I said, if you're wanting to see sort of how Hiccup comes into play with a lot of things that he has in the second movie, his sword and his glider, then this is the series. Same thing goes for a lot of the relationships like Astrid and Hiccup's. The other writers as well have their relationships in this series as well established well in advance. And overall, I would say that this is the best series. Granted, you do have to watch Riders of Berk and Defenders of Berk in order to understand some story ties, but this was always my favorite of the three. Dawn of the Dragon Racers. This was actually a sequel to Race to the Edge, but it's at the same time a prequel to How to Train Your Dragon 2. This was also sort of like The Legend of the Bone Napper, where you could get a combo pack or just have it as a bonus on the Blu-ray. This was basically the pilot episode of Race to the Edge. While it takes place after Race to the Edge, this was kind of the showcase for it. It's pretty good. It just kind of tells a story about how dragon races come about, how the face paint came about, and just the overall reaction to it on Berk and how it became sort of a tradition. It's not too bad. How to Train Your Dragon 2. I think that this is quite literally one of the greatest animated movies of all time. Its story, in my opinion, is leaps and bounds over the first movie, which is very rare with a sequel. Instead of telling the same story over again, they tell an entirely new chapter, and it's cool to see the creators age up the character. Hiccup is close to a man now, but he's in that weird stage where he has no idea of what to do with his life.
I'm still looking.
I think that the thing that I like the most about this movie is that it has real consequences of characters' actions. Stoic, one of the main characters, dies and never comes back after this. It's a harsh reality that this world offers that's not really present in a lot of children's movies.
No.
It forwards the characters too to push against the villain of the movie, as well as it helps Hiccup to take that final step into becoming the chief of Berk. Once again, characters and story are at their foremost here. I think that the animation here is some of the best that has ever been put to screen. The detail with the skin of the dragons and the fur of the capes is incredible. The colors as well, especially when they're in the dragon cave, are amazing. As I said, I like that everything here is still character and story driven, and things have changed, as do things with time. Hiccup has improved his glider, his leg now has a range of abilities, as well as his awesome sword. The story is more mature as well. While the first movie was more of a whimsical adventure film, this is more of the dark Empire Strikes Back movie. I think that the end of this too is uplifting and heavy hitting. The final battle is awesome because especially all of a sudden, this is Godzilla. When Hiccup becomes chief, I've always appreciated this shot, and I don't think a lot of people realize why. I don't know what it is, but you feel relieved that it's happening, but at the same time, you feel the weight of the responsibility he now faces.
The chief has come home!
Overall, one of the best showcases as to why animated movies are not something that can be overlooked. And I think that's the case with even the next movie. How to Train Your Dragon 3, or How to Train Your Dragon The Hidden World. Again, can I just say that the animation is absolutely incredible. Only 5 years went by from How to Train Your Dragon 2, and this just looks leaps and bounds better. The shadows and the colors, especially when they're in this forest, look amazing. Compare it to the first, and it's just so impressive to see how animation has come. The shots are a lot more complex as well. There's always something to look at, especially with Berk. And you know me, I love my one-shot takes, and there's a great one in the beginning of this. The story of this, in my opinion, is not as strong as the second movie, but I still love it just as much. Hiccup is basically a Pokemon catcher of this, and now his island is full of dragons. And when someone threatens their island, Grimoire the Grizzly. This guy is a dragon killer, not a catcher, and I like that because it's something completely new that Hiccup has never dealt with. Before, in all the previous stories, whether it be with the second movie or with the little TV shows, everyone wanted to capture the dragons, not necessarily kill it. And it just so happens that this guy killed every Night Fury, and his voice acting is great.
Say Chief Hiccup, or do I call you Hiccup? What do you prefer?
Speaking of the voice acting, did you know that nearly everyone has reprised their role throughout this entire series? I think that's something that's really amazing that not a lot commentate on. I mean, for one, TJ Miller did the voice of Tough Nut throughout the entire show line, but here he's replaced.
Cold feet. I've seen it before.
That's definitely not TJ Miller. But I like to kind of chalk it up to his voice changing. I don't know. I think that a lot here complain mostly about the mother character. She doesn't have a lot to do, but I like to point out that these stories constantly change. For instance, with the first movie, as I said, its main focus is on the relationship between Hiccup and his father and Toothless. The second movie was mostly about her. That was the story in How to Train Your Dragon 2. This is a completely new movie, so she's mostly in the background just giving advice, which I'm fine with. This movie is mostly about Toothless, believe it or not, and his relationship with the Light Fury. But also there's that good comparison between Astrid and Hiccup's relationship. I mean, the animation here is gorgeous. I mean, look at the lighting with the plasma bolt. Look at the hair. Look at the shadows. Look at the sunset. If it wasn't for the characters, a lot of these backgrounds would look so realistic. I mean, look at the sand. That looks real. Compare that with the first movie. This looks real. It looks like they literally drew in the dirt and just put it into the animated movie. A lot of the story here is for the fans. For instance, with the flashback, I see that he's got the toy that his mother gave him from the show. There's lots of shots that mirror from the first movie, like how the friendship of Hiccup and Toothless ended where it began. And I think that goes for the end prologue. This is one of the best endings to a movie, in my opinion. And I'm not afraid to admit, I got emotional when this happened. This wasn't necessarily me getting upset about the movie, but it was more so me saying goodbye to my childhood. It was oddly surreal. Something that had been there for me for the longest time was finally coming to a close. I don't really care what anyone says about The Hidden World. I think it's just as strong as a movie as the first two. How to Train Your Dragon Homecoming. This was a quick 22-minute short that takes place before the epilogue in the third movie, and it's pretty much okay. It's not necessarily at all. So, yeah, that's about it. So you can see that I've been here since the beginning, whether it be with the books or even the animated movies. So when I first heard of the live-action movie was in development, I think I was with everyone else, where I was raising my pitchfork and torch saying, this is not necessary, I'm not seeing this. But do a little research, and that's what I did. And now I'm pretty interested in it. First, look at who's making it. We're getting the original director and writer of the trilogy. Dean DeBlois is coming back to direct and write, and that surprised me, and it gives me a ton of hope. You have the composer, John Powell, is also coming back. So you have your main important people here. I think that the only worry is how well Dean will do directing live action compared to the animated world. The actors selected. I'm not very familiar with Hiccup, but I am with the actress for Astrid, and she's a really good one. I'm not too sure, but I think we'll have to wait until they're both in costume. And I think that goes for the world itself. How will it look? How will the dragons look in the live action? Are we talking about the stage show or more of a cartoony look? And I think this will make it or break it for people, especially me. How will the world look translated to live action? For me personally, I think that the stage show looked really impressive and all the dragons translated pretty well for a more realistic look. Maybe tweak Toothless a little, but do that, and I think it will be fine. I don't know, like I said, once we get our first look, that's what's gonna make it or break it for me.
Okay, it's go time. It's go time. And then the dive happens. Like the thing goes into the water. Come on, buddy. Come on, buddy.